Welcome to the Anti-Noise Experience, podcast endurance, noise, and random musings. It's Friday, September 25th, 2020. I remember when Fridays were something to look forward to, but of course with COVID, Fridays are just another day, it seems, especially since there's not a whole lot of races. There is a Diamond League in Doha. I'm going to try and find it on the internets and see if it's free, but it probably costs money. But that should be something to look forward to watching. This weekend don't have any races. I've kind of been doing some podcasts talking about resiliency and what you should do during this time frame. And of course, I had a comeback after being injured for the first time in 40 years with my fall back in March and the hospitalization back in April. So now I'm finally back to normal, and it's kind of I decided to try and revive my running. Over the years, I've been more of a walker than a runner. I run from time to time, but just never really consistently, and mainly just running races just to get done or to make cutoffs, or sometimes to, get a podium like I did back in the BB48 where I ran the last 5K to end up getting third place by 60 yards. So, interestingly enough, I saw this article on Podium Runner that they just reposted. This podcast isn't just about ultra running. It's about any kind of running and also other endurance sports. I talk about the Tour de France, triathlon, swimming. I definitely want to do one of those swim runs. Just don't know if I want to travel to Texas to do it. In fact, they just posted an article about a podcast describing the course there in Austin, and now I really want to go do it. But it's not until November, and that's going to be a lot of cold pool swims between now and then, so who knows. So this one's ready to go beyond a marathon, and I hear this often. It's interesting. I talk to a lot of people because I'm in these fixed time races, so you can spend a lot of time with people, and I'm always amazed. I'll ask people like, hey, what's your marathon time? And they're in a 12-hour race or doing an ultra, and I'm like, oh, I've never run a marathon or a 10K or a half marathon. A lot of people kind of read a book, Dave Goggins, Dean Karnassus, those kind of people, and then they just jump into doing ultras, which I guess is okay, but it's kind of crazy. But, then there's some people who do still kind of come up and do half marathons, kind of like the people I trained in the Bigger Distance Project for the past decade. And then they want a challenge of an ultra. And so this article talks about the natural next race is the 50K, and it says that the next challenge is going further. It's time to take the journey into what's not just the next distance, but a next world, ultra running. The 31-mile 50K is the shortest distance you'll find when you push beyond the limits of a marathon. And I'm kind of like with Ioannis Kouros, not to his extreme. His extreme is he doesn't feel like an ultra is until you go past 24 hours where you experience day and night. And I kind of agree with that. But for me, I think the cutoff point is 50 miles. I think a 50K is really not an ultra because if you've done big city marathons like LA, New York, Chicago, you end up having to get up super early. You walk a mile or two to the start. When you run the course, you're running around everybody into aid stations, so you end up not doing 26 miles. You end up doing 27 or so. And then you got to walk a mile or two to your car. So you do a 50K when you do a big city marathon. So calling a 50K an ultra, it's kind of pushing it. But that's what this article talks about. For me, I think, and I tell people, 50 miles is a good ultra distance because, there's a lot of people who can crank out a pretty good marathon. But when you go to 50, you get to that 35, 40-mile zone, and the wheels start falling off. And you have to kind of do some of the things they talk about in this article, which I'll bring up. In fact, it's interesting. I have a good friend who used to be in the Bear Resistance Project. She calls herself the Slow Antelope. And she was crewing me at many races and really got interested. She herself was doing half marathons and marathons, which, she's mainly just a walker because of injuries. And she also later on told the world that she has multiple sclerosis. And eventually, though, she finally said, I want to do an ultra. So I took her to Beyond Limits, fixed time race, which is a great place to do an ultra because you don't have to worry about making cutoffs. So, you can sign up for the 12-hour, the 24-hour, 48. They even have a 72 at Beyond Limits. They unfortunately had to cancel it this year twice, once in the spring and then the fall. But so I took her to that, and she's out there on the 2-mile loop, enjoying herself, hanging out with people, putting in the miles. And then I remember catching up to her, and she's like, hey, I'm at mile, 31. She was at the 50K mark. And I was like, congratulations, and I saw her finish, and I'm out doing laps. And then an hour or two later, I catch her again. I was like, hey, what are you doing out here? And she's like, well, I stopped at 50K, got a massage, took a little bit of break, but then I realized, 50K is not really, as you always say, an ultra. She said, I'm going for 50 miles. And she ended up going for 50 miles. It was kind of cool. That year it was freezing cold because they used to have the race. It's up in the mountains, but they used to have it in like late March. And so I remember we were walking out there passing all the skinny people because we could stay a lot warmer. And I ended up catching her on her final lap and got to see her finish her 50 miles. And she ended up, I remember when I saw her at mile 40, I said, hey, the John F. Kennedy Challenge is 50 miles in 20 hours. You can do that. And she ended up pushing the pace, and she ended up doing like 50 miles in 17 and a half hours. So big congratulations to her. So this article talks about what kind of training and specific things do you need to do your first ultra. And they kind of go into the old do doubles on the weekends and this, that, and the other thing. And it's pretty much, you can do an ultra. If you can go out and run a marathon and do it comfortably, and then like the next day go for a walk, then you're pretty much prepared to do an ultra. You want to do a little better, of course, put in some longer miles, but it's just time on your feet. Join a hiking club, spend time just all day hikes, like our hike club, we'll get up at 5 in the morning, drive a couple hours, hike 7 or 8 hours, and drive home. That's excellent ultra training. Same thing like crew or pacer race. Great way to see what works, what doesn't. So your training, like this article says, the most 50Ks are trail races, which is definitely true. So you need to get some time and experience on the trails. Though I recommend when you do your first ultra, do it on a loop course. It's so much more enjoyable. So much more. You get to see people. You get to learn more. Like with the trail races, there's so many things that can go wrong, and difficulty and time cutoffs and things like that. If you do a trail 50K, make sure you do it at a race that has a 50 mile or 100K. You don't want to be messing with the cutoffs. Don't go to a race that's like a 30K, 50K, because then you're going to have the pressure of making cutoffs. And, out there, it's pretty lonely on the trails. So this guy says, definitely if you're going to do a 50K, get some hill work. And hills are great. Hills are basically runners' weight training. It's what all the East Africans do. They just run hills. You don't see them in the gym lifting weights, and you really don't. And the hill training definitely makes you stronger. But it's also just time on your feet, and figuring out the mental game is very important. So many people just don't really, dial it back and realize, wow, I'm going to be out here for a long time. I need to take it easy. And like my friend Bill Schultz, great 6-day racer back in the day, ran across country. He's now, I think, in his 70s. He's had a lot of races that Mike Melton races times at, and he always says every race is like a mile. And I think that's one of the problems. A lot of people who come into the sport later in life, reading a book, they don't realize they need to do those shorter races because those are little experiments, like I often say. And so, yeah, first lap, chill. Second lap, even chill. Third lap is where you got to focus so that you can set yourself up for success. And then usually the fourth lap is okay. So that's kind of one of the things. Another part of this article, so they don't talk a lot about training, but it's not a whole lot different than marathon training. Myself, I was talking to Scott Burton the other day, who was on my podcast, and you can watch that. And he likes going out and doing 5-hour workouts. I never do more than 2.5, 13 miles at most. So it's just kind of got to find what fits for you. And but in here, excuse me, it's the smoke still in the air. Christian McDougall, of course, who wrote the book Born to Run. Wow, that book seems like it came out so long ago. He calls ultramarathons an eating and drinking contest with a little exercise and scenery thrown in. And that's true, but then again, this is the same thing. People overthink and overanalyze their... I'm sorry, I got to take a drink here. Sorry about this. They think about the eating and drinking. One of the reasons is, if you go out too hard, you bonk, and then you try and eat, and then you get sick, and then you don't eat, and then you slow down, and then eventually you get on water and you finish. So don't go crazy and overdrink and overeat. Practice in training. That's why I think joining a hiking club and doing those long all-day hikes, just getting familiar, not only time on your feet, but hydration, nutrition, and pacing. A lot of times the nutrition and pace and hydration issues are a pacing issue. You go out too hard, you get into a deficit, which is what the Sunday Blend Day, she's often quoted in a lot of these things. She says, start early and don't get behind. You can't make it up later in a race. And of course here she says, running 10-minute miles, you're going to go through 600 calories an hour. And I don't think so. I think that's another thing you need to do in your training is learn to become more efficient fat burner, doing a lot more slower race pace workouts where you get burning calories, burn fat, not carbs, not your glycogen, and also do some depletion runs that me and the Jester do all the time. Like I always go out in the morning, do a couple hour workout, and don't eat until afterwards, and you're just kind of training your body to be more efficient and burn fat, because even the skinniest person's got plenty on them to go quite some time. So if you're not going out hard, and also in a race, you really don't want you to have your body ask it to do two things, like processing food and putting in the distance. So she says, that the first hour to 90 minutes take in only water, but after it's best to stay a strict schedule. I guess so, yeah, but it's just kind of like you also just have to eat to hunger. I mean, granted, you got to work on that, and that's hence why you need to do longer workouts sometimes with the group, because if you're always just going out in ideal conditions, like at 6 in the morning on the weekends, and you go out and do a 3 or 4 hour run, you never really find out what you need to do and what you need to do to take care of yourself. And of course, she does say the second important thing to learn, says, is that the elite runners have learned to master when it comes to mid-race nutrition. The elite runners don't think of it as food when they're racing. They think of it as fuel, and that's definitely the case. You need to find out what works best for you, and that basically means taking care of yourself. It's all about getting gas into the car. And so some of the things you should be on the lookout for when you're going to train for your race is, if you have specialized products and things you just think you definitely need, then bring them. But find out what the race is going to have. I pretty much live off the land. Like a bear, it's pretty much whatever's in the aid station. I tell my athletes, eat what 5-year-old you liked, because if you liked it when you're 5, you'll like it when you're older, and you'll like it in the middle of the night or whatever you're doing. And so, that comes down to like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or Oreos or whatever it is. But I just kind of, and also I say, go up to the aid station and be like a pregnant woman. Whatever looks good, eat that. So, and one of the things that happens at aid stations is the aid station workers are constantly offering you things and this, that, and the other thing. And what I do at fixed loop races is I tell the people very politely at the beginning, please, when I come in, don't ask me what I want. I just kind of look and go, that looks good. That doesn't look good. And so, definitely find out what they got. Bring what you need. Me, I bring my diet Dr. Peppers. And then, of course, there's no real study plans. You just need to figure it out on your own. And then, of course, hydration is another big issue. I think people overdrink nowadays too much, but you definitely need to take care of that and your electrolytes and stuff like that. Lastly, in this article, they talk about cross-training, and cross-training is fine and dandy, but you first need to put time on your feet and get strong that way. Build a good chassis for just walking and running, and then you can work on some cross-training. And definitely one of the things this person does talk about is working on your core. And I think one of the things that cross-training is good, one cross-training thing that I always recommend, don't go cycling. That's a waste of time. You could spend time on your feet. You don't need to go ride your bike. Swimming's okay, but you spend a lot of time traveling to and from the swim place. But yoga, I definitely highly recommend yoga. Many of my athletes over the years have used it, and it's good, especially the hot yoga, helps you deal with the heat. But yoga is a great workout and gets you all around strong and fitness wise. And then lastly in this article are two things they recommend, which I absolutely say no. Definitely on number one, ice baths. No, you don't need ice baths. You ice bath, you're just retarding what the human body's trying to do. If it swells, it's your body telling you, hey, stupid, stop doing that. Also, swelling's bringing things in to make you get better and protect the limb or body. And so when you do an ice bath, you're retarding that growth, that protection, and all that. So, ice baths are for pro athletes who've got to play many games in a short amount of time, or like you're in the Olympics and you got to run a 1,500 meter heat in the morning and then run the final at night. Then you take an ice bath to get out the lactic acid and the soreness. But you as a training, you shouldn't use ice baths. Let your body recover naturally. I always say we haven't had ice for on demand for more than 100 years. So somehow humans made it this long without ice baths. Of course, you had ice baths in the winter, whether you wanted one or not. But, icing, no, stay away from it. Drugs, all those medications, stay away from it. They do have here massages. And I guess, massages are okay. Myself, I never do them. I know people swear by them. But then again, the problem with the massages is it takes away from training and time you have, traveling to and from, and expense. But I guess it does help in recovery. But that's something that you got to decide whether it works for you or not. I myself have never had one and stayed healthy for all these years, and that's kind of my philosophy. So, training for your first ultra, yeah, I'm all for. Sometimes people think I'm like too hardcore. It's like, hey, I'm excited for people when they do their first 5K, walk their first 5K, do their first bike ride, do whatever, swim. So I'm not pooping on like 50Ks and stuff, but if you've been doing marathons consistently and you want to move on to a new world, the 50K is too similar to a marathon. Try a 50 miler. And how do I know this? Because I've caught lots of really good marathoners at mile 35, 40 in a 50 mile race. And you can see that they're definitely entering into a new world and something different, where those people, I'll never see them in a 50K. It's just too short. They get it done too quick. So my recommendation is, try a 50 mile or a 12-hour race, and then you'll definitely get a feel for the ultra world. And then if you get really crazy, you can go to the Curris land where he says 24 hours or longer. So as always, stay healthy, be boring, not epic.